I'm Károly Balogh, president of the International Dendrological Research Institute, which has an arm in Boston, and the International Dendrological Foundation is in Budakeszi, a suburb of Budapest, Hungary. We are presently sitting on the second floor of this institute, which houses the herbarium of the team, which is led by Dr. Zsolt Debreczy and his co-worker, Dr. Istvan Racz. The foundation is housing a collection of several decades of work, field work, which will result in the publication of a Dendrological Atlas. I got to know the team's work when they arrived at Harvard, myself having been associated with Harvard University, and very soon I realized that this work of theirs is of extreme scientific significance, since it will hopefully map all the trees and shrubs of the temperate zones of the world, which has not been done yet and probably will never be repeated. Moreover, it has a great significance from an ecological viewpoint, since the environment is shrinking, and this is a last-minute effort to document the existing flora of our universe.
In 1971, we made up to illustrate the temperate zones dendroflora in a 14-volume Dendrological Atlas. It was, of course, a long story to get to this idea. In 1965, I got to the Natural History Museum, and I was curator of the World Flora Herbaria, and I was more and more interested about the dendrology I was more and more interested in the temperate zone dendrology, that is the Holarctic and the Holantarctic dendrological world. Of course, to write a book without illustration it's almost a hopeless idea. So I realized that I need illustrator to make this work. And the opportunity came. In 1968, we started to write a book on the evergreens, hardy evergreens of the world, and we published it with Racz, who was by then a very famous plant illustrator, because she illustrated the Flora Iconographia Hungaricae, which is a wonderful book with 4,200 botanical drawings. She was very positive about our idea, and then we produced the Gardens Green in the Winter 2, which introduced about 680 evergreens from all part of the temperate world, and Racz illustrated them with beautiful two-dimensional drawings. Then the new idea came, how to write a book on the dendroflora itself. First we started with two-dimensional drawings, but step by step we get closer to the more artistic way of illustrating this flora and started to make the three-dimensional drawings. I had a feeling how to arrange the plants in the plates, and made the composition, which then was worked out by Racz or other illustrators. In the meanwhile, we visited many botanical gardens to collect this material and preserve them partially by pressing them as a herbarium and partially in alcohol, so so we would be able to preserve them in space as a three-dimensional space. In 1984, it was quite clear, 1980s, in 1980s, it was quite clear that there will be many financial problems to continue our work because of the political and economical crisis in the communist system, including Hungary, and we were looking for opportunity to continue the work somewhere where the resources are available. So in 1983, we went to the USA, and it was one of our purpose to find a host for our Dendrological Atlas project. Although we traveled all over the country that time, our main purpose was to go to Massachusetts, where the Arnold Arboretum is operating, and to meet Harvard professors to find the support to continue our work. We took wonderful samples with us and showed Peter Ashton, who was the director of the Arnold Arboretum that time. We showed our mock-up of the Dendrological Atlas to Peter Ashton. In 1983, it was almost clear that there will be many difficulties to continue our work, to pay for the illustrators, to supply us with the necessary amount of films, expedition expenses, because of crisis all over the communist world, including Hungary. So we planned a trip to the USA with the hope that we will find a host institute for our work, and indeed we succeed in 1983 to go to the USA, and beside traveling across the country, which was necessary to collect the material, we had a main purpose to meet somebody at Harvard University, Arnold Arboretum, with the hope that maybe they will be able to accommodate our work. We met Peter Ashton, and he was very interested in this work. We showed samples of the Dendrological Atlas, which meant to show all the woody plants, particularly trees and shrubs of the temperate world for the public in an richly illustrated 14-volume venture. We went even to publisher that time, but even the publishers were very much interested about publishing this work. It immediately was clear that it will not be a one-step job. We need to find support, publisher, supporter for the publication, and to complete our volumes. We had the fortune that in 1983 we got the verbal offer that we will get a fellowship to go to the Harvard University, to the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, to continue our work. In 1988, finally, with a team of 4, we traveled to the USA. This team included my wife, Gyöngyi, 2 illustrators, and Istvan Racz, who was my colleague at the Natural History Museum, and particularly interested in the artistic photographing of the living world, particularly the plants. And we already worked together since 1976. In the first year, we had an exhibit at the Harvard University, which had a great success, and this stimulated to create the International Dendrological Research Institute. And soon after, we were able to continue our work not only as Mercer Fellows, but also as visitor scientists. After the period after this Harvard period, we looked forward traveling all over the world to collect the material that we needed for the Dendrological Atlas and to accomplish all the photographs that we needed for this venture. It was very difficult to find the funds for that purpose, even in the USA. So we got advices and we turned to the Earthwatch. Earthwatch was very supportive. They set up the meetings with the potential volunteers who would imagine to support our work in the field. And indeed, in 1919, we went to study the Mexican possibility, found the necessary connection in Mexico, saw how we can arrange the collecting permit with different institutions, and found Boone Harburg in Oaxaca, in Ixtlan de Juarez, who said he can give us a casita where we can start the collecting and illustration of work. And indeed, in 1991, 1992 we spent in Mexico, and again in 1993, 94 we spent almost 7 months in Mexico and traveled from the north, south to Mexico, Chiapas and Guatemala. In this period we had the success to discover several new species and several varieties which were new to science, and this really gave a great impact to our work, because not only we were able to find more volunteers to continue this work in China, then in Chile, Taiwan, Japan, and different other parts of the world, but also we get funds from different foundations. Just one to mention is the Stanley Smith Horticultural Fund, the Wharton Trust, and several other main important donors of scientific works. So after finishing the Mexican expedition, we continued in China with 4 teams, and then in Taiwan with 2 teams, and then again in Japan with 2 teams. And while we had this expedition with the volunteers, with many labor, many hands to come to finish the collection, to press the plants, to arrange them in different orders, we also had enough money from grants to continue a trip across that region where we made where we had the Earth expedition, and see a much larger scope of China, of Japan, of Taiwan, and Mexico and Chile, New Zealand, Tasmania. In 2004, finally we finished the expedition period and started to make the drawings and photographic work more intensively. But in the meanwhile, we got a great opportunity to publish a book about the conifers, because the conifers were the first systematical unit what we wanted to publish, and we thought we will write a popular work for the public to show in color how these conifers look like. This book of 2 volumes is the English version, which soon will be published maybe in July 2008. Contrasting the Dendrological Atlas, which always has an illustration with a 3-dimensional drawing and a plate with usually 4 or 5 photographs to show the details, and many illustrations which show the leaf variability of the main species, as seen in this plate in case of lindens. The Conifers Around the World set the goal to show a beautiful color book for the interested public, to show the conifers around the world, that is the conifers of the temperate zone, about 540 taxa, that is mostly species, but some of them varieties or critical species. This work already includes many of the many ideas from the Dendrological Atlas. For instance, not only illustrate the species itself in several photographs, but also has habitat photographs which already show the plants in their natural habitat and list all the species which associate to them. So here is a spot where the coniferous world, which is the subject of this volume, meet with the dendroflora in general. The broadleaf flora and the conifers together appear in these pictures. Finally, it shows another interesting feature that we very consistently illustrated for the Dendrological Atlas, is the bark. The bark is very colorful, and as a structure is a wonderful element of the trees and also in many shrubs. And in this volume, for instance, the Conifers Around the World, these 2 volumes, we publish about 600 color photographs of the barks. Of course, we had to have a scientific limitation for our work. Tropical floras still very little known or just partially known, and we did not want to go into that project which we would never be able to accomplish. We wanted to illustrate and deal only with the temperate world, which was the home of about 6,000 major species and thousands of varieties and forms. From scientific aspect, we can say that we work with the whole Arctic and the whole Antarctic world. From vegetation historical aspect, it mainly means the orthotertiary dendroflora, the monotertiary dendroflora, and the Antarctic part of the Antarctic flora. If you see the world map, this flora includes entire North America and Mexico, which only in small sections of the Earth's history was connected with South America. Then we deal with the Macaronesian and Eurasian flora. Then the very southern tip of South America, Tasmania, and New Zealand. This is what we call whole Arctic world, and this is what we call whole Antarctic world. The major regions what we deal with is the Rocky Mountain region, the Madrian region, the Eastern North American region, the Macaronesian region, the European region, the Mediterranean region, the Arabo-Saharan region, the Irano-Turanian region, the Eastern Asian region, and the so-called circumpolar region, which covers all the rest toward the north. In the south, we only deal with the Chilean region and the New Zealandia region, and a little bit we include from the West Australian region of the Australian Forested Kingdom, which mainly include Southern Australia and Tasmania. This world, of course, had to be covered first by trips. So we went to Europe first, and we traveled all over North to South Europe, Asia Minor, and North Africa. Then we traveled across North America, spent 2 Earthwatch expeditions in Mexico, and traveled 3 more times there for certain particular purposes. Went on to Guatemala. In Asia, we particularly focused on China because that's the richest gelatin of the orthotertiary dendroflora, and we particularly intensively traveled in the Tibetan, eastern Chinese border region, which inhabit perhaps the richest part of the woody flora in the world. From living sample, and this is a very labor-intensive work. First, of course, we have to obtain the possibly wild collected material, which we fix in a stative in a stand, and try to arrange it in a position which is really natural. And then I make a composition which more or less give a guide for the botanist, for the illustrators, how to arrange the drawing on the paper, and then they start to make and work out the sketch. I have currently 4 illustrators working here, but there are 7 illustrators who illustrated so far the Dendrological Atlas. There is a proverb in China that an illustration worth thousands of words. Really, in botany, the botanists since long time discovered this, and they illustrate their specimens at the description, or when they want to sell a book with the descriptions, they always put illustrations next to it. It is not different in the Dendrological Atlas as well. There are 2 different types of illustrations. There are 2 different types of botanical illustrations. One is the 2-dimensional, when the plant drawings are made from pressed plants, and really the illustrators give the outline of the plants in a flat two-dimensional vision. There is another way of the illustration. It's three-dimensional, it's a more artistic way. In this case, the illustrator, although has a two-dimensional parameter because I'm working on a sheet of paper, would like to try to illustrate it in three dimensions to give the impression that we would be on the top of the tree and see that particular part of the branchlet as it would be in the nature. In this case, MS is just working on a fur specimen, and with a very meticulous work from needle by needle, from scar to scar, in helical order, she built up this little part of the branchlet which will be part of the composition. For instance, in ABS Normanniana, it's very difficult to illustrate even one branchlet because it has hundreds of needles, and each needle is a very precise order. If we make just one mistake, it's immediately visible in the drawing. So we must be very careful. Sometimes even we have to correct nature. If there is some little disorder in the order, we have to correct it.
Agnes Kazsóki, one of our illustrators, is right now working on a Colorado spruce. Spruce is in general the same difficult to illustrate first. The pungens, the Colorado spruce, is particularly difficult because the needles are in helical order but also perpendicular to the main axis, so they are almost radially outspreading. And it's of course difficult to illustrate the helical order when it's coming to us or going to the other way. So this is a big challenge to put down it that it would look like a live specimen in the drawing. Katalin here is working on one of the Douglas firs. Douglas fir is particularly interesting because the bracts are exceeding of the fertilizers, and it gives a challenge how to illustrate the bracts and the spheres in a helical and a spiral order. Tony Vamos is working on a kaya in Japanese, and those the Americans often use this name. One of the Torea species which live in Japan, and it's very interesting because this is one of this group of the conifers which belong to Taxaceae and has no cones but groups of seeds, and each seed is covered with a fleshy aureole. And when the aureole ripens, then it's split up as you see here in the drawing. And it has a very nice, interesting tension as it's split up as the spiral order again. So that's we would like to illustrate, and I think also important to have the bark in each specimen, so we could have a full impression like we would be sitting on the top of the tree and see both the seeds and the bark together. This is a Cupressaceae, the incense cedar, which is living in California, in the Sierra Nevadas and the coast ranges. And this species has a very interesting structure because the scales are in whorls, or at least they appear like they would be in a whorls of 4. And also the cones are in a very interesting position, almost in a whorl of 4. 2 of them are fertile, these large scales, and 2 of them are sterile. The seeds has long wings, unlike many other Cupressaceae, with very short or marginal wing. This composition shows the bark and a very nice adult branchlet. The Italian stone pine is the only diproxylon pines with very large seeds. So it's the only member of the pines which has much larger seed body than wing and belongs to the diproxylon group of the pines. These Italian stone pines live in the Mediterranean, but the real distribution is probably not as it is today all over the Mediterranean basin, but probably Asia Minor and the East European Mediterranean region. The cones are very typical, very similar to the North American piñons, which are, however, haploxylon. Pilus comata is a haploxylon pine, was a big surprise in the conifer research. It was found in Yunnan province in the 1970s, but was not named until 1993. In Yunnan province, in the Socha in the northeast, Only 37 specimens remained by the time it was really described. The specialty of this pine that the bark has this beautiful scaly structure, just like lacebark pine, Pinus bungeana. And but the cones are very different, not large-seeded and pinion-like type of cone, but a diploxylon type of cone with a small seed body and large wings. Another Mediterranean pine is more restricted to the Western Mediterranean is Pinus pinaster, the maritime pine. It has a wonderful bud. It's worth it to see how this bud with the dark recurving scale tips coat this cylindrical cone body, and also very interesting that the cone scales has this spiny umbo, which originally forms a spiny little conelet, and later, when the cone is developing, they of course position on the tip of the cone apophysis. The Himalayan white pine has very long needles, beautifully pendant structure. The Himalayan white pine, also called silk pine, is a beautiful pendulous leaf pine species with terminal tips of the terminal umbels on the cone scales. It is a hoploxylon pine and widely distributed in the Himalayas. This fir tree has almost blue cones. It's not easy to illustrate the scale of the colors by black and white, by pencil, because we have to find a scale from light green to dark green to brown to yellow to the purplish and the blue. I think this illustration well shows, comparing with others, that it has a dark blue cone. It is the Momi fir, which is living in Hondo, other words Honshu, in Japan. Cupressus gigantea, or the Tibetan giant cypress, is a close relative of the widely distributed Himalayan cypress, Cupressus terullosa. It was discovered as late as 1975 and became famous because it had the largest trunk among perhaps all cypresses. The largest tree was measured for 5.8 meters across. This pine is very interesting because of the pendulous branches. Pinus pinciano live in a very restricted area in Mexico, in the north central, and it's only live in canyon land on limestone, and the wind is almost blowing in this region. I remember when we saw it in Querétaro, and that valley was very windy, and just like willow trees, the branches was always hanging and swinging from left to right and left to right, depending on the wind direction. And it is also a hoploxylon pine, belongs to the pinon pine group, so it's related to the North American piñons, but in a different section of it, and famous with his short-winged seeds, and this pendulous, interesting branchlet structure. To illustrate this juniper is a real challenge. I think the most interesting part of it, comparing with other junipers, is of how the barks are peeling off. It has a papery structure, and the upper layers are gray, the lower layers are purplish brown, and all the transitions in between. So sometimes these barks look really beautiful with all the shades from gray to brown or grayish brown. Juniperus saltuaria live in the high mountains of western China and of course the Tibetan part, Zhejiang province of China. In Judago, where the sample is here what we collected, It was living almost in 3,500 meter altitude, associated with beautiful carpets of rhododendrons and other alpine shrubs. We also illustrate the broadleaf trees. More recently we focused to complete the conifers, but many of the black and white, the graphic drawings were made from broadleaf trees. Here is a Tilia euchlora, which we illustrated from the Arnold Arboretum. The illustrator was Nora Groh. The interesting thing is how we try to combine the inflorescence and the fruit. You don't really see that it's two different periods of time in the illustration. One illustration, of course, in the early summer or late spring, when the flowers appear, and then one illustration from the late autumn time when the fruits mature. Here is another Stewartia, other broadleaf tree, Stewartia sinensis. It's a camellia relative with beautiful white flowers, and the major thing is to see this wonderful lace bark of the thicker branchlets and the white flowers and the somewhat pubescent leaves all together. Thousands of drawings will be incorporated in the atlas of this type of black and white illustrations. We are here in one of the rooms of the International Dendrological Foundation's herbarium. The herbarium is now partially placed in open boxes, cardboard boxes. The building is rather fire resistant because it's a concrete structure. And after the collection, we still have the plant glues or mounted on a newspaper. In this case, a collection from near the Tibetan border in the Kangling area. Is a rhododendron arboretum. In this solution, we can never lose the record to the plant or mix up, because it's both written on the newspaper with a permanent ink pen and also in a label, so we could see it before we take out or open the specimen in the newspaper. Later, in the second step, the labels will be put into this herbarium and with a scotch tape fixed it. And then the next step will be when it's mounted to a cardboard and go to the final phase in the herbarium. Our foundation not yet completed the final herbarium, but we hope that within a few years the final placement of the plants will be solved. Right now we have about 250,000 specimens. All of them are trees and shrubs, or other woody plants, woody vines, and not considering all the many herbs, this is a rich collection which represents really most of the woody plants of North America, and many of them in Southeast Asia, the Tibetan Plateau, the Irano-Turanian region, and also the Mediterranean is quite represented. We have another room. Which accommodate the Chilean collection, the New Zealand collection, the Tasmanian. The Tasmanian collection, as the generosity of the colleagues in Tasmania is very rich. We were able to collect half of the native woody plants of Tasmania while we were staying there for a period of 10 days.
This specimen is to illustrate the associating species of a seaside vegetation. It shows a woody vine, in Latin name or scientific name Ampelopsis brevipeduculata, with fruits. This is fixed on a newspaper and equipped with this label, and now this is ready to go for processing in a herbarium.
Here are samples from the herbarium. These were mounted for an exhibit, but basically it shows the major steps of the herbarium process. One is what I showed in the collection. When they are mounted, they will be labeled, and the labels are, of course, labeled with the Dendrological Foundation's label, or when we exchange, then we will, of course, keep the original collection with the original label, like in this sample here. The exchange is a very important part of our herbarium development, although 90% of our collection is the one that we made in different parts of the world. Of course, to get this herbarium, the value of such a herbarium is unmeasurable. It is so difficult to collect those plants and then to transport and to identify, mount them. So the value of a herbarium sheet is really symbolic. If we say $20 or $30, it's almost unreplaceable and difficult to express their value. Many of the plants were collected in very dangerous circumstances, and in many cases we really would not like to repeat the collection trip again because of the circumstances. We have some story, of course, in every country. Here is, for instance, Abies fabri, which is one of the beautiful blue conifers in western China. Very good habitats are in the Ameishan, in the Gunkashan, and the neighboring mountains. And when we were heading to Kangding in 1995, we met with the problems between the administration and the scientists, which is very often so typical. The administration would like a paper from the Forestry Bureau who owns the forest, and the political organization like the police, because they wanted to know where foreigners are currently staying, and also the Academy of Science, which was the scientific supporter of the project. We had a bus of 70 persons that we purchased for the expedition to transport our volunteers and finally to make a round trip in China. And because the trip was very long, we experienced this very interesting story that while we were heading back to China from Zhejiang province to Tibet, our two drivers suddenly escaped back home because they wanted to see their family, and we found the keys of the 70-person bus on the hotel table, and then we had to hire another driver couple who were driving us all through central China. Very difficult road that time. There were really muddy, absolutely difficult highway between east and western China. When we get to the neighboring cities of Kangding, which was Tachialu earlier in Tibetan name, in a small town which called Tianchuan, we were parking in the bus, and police people came to us and asked what we are doing. We said we are collecting and photographing plants. They asked for the permit, and a Chinese colleague explained the story, explained them what we are doing. Still, they were not satisfied with us, and they said we were passing through an area which were forbidden for foreigners, and we said, well, we had the permit to go from eastern China to western China, and we were just heading on the main highway, so how would we know that there is a secret section for foreigners? And they said it was published in the February newspaper. Now that was 1995 June or May, and they said it was published in the 1995 February newspaper. So we went to the library. Our Chinese guide went to the library and we checked the newspaper, but there was not any announcement there. So we were closed in the hotel. We were not allowed to leave that hotel for days until a committee came out from Chengdu, and they checked our herbarium and checked our permits and everything, and finally they decided that we cannot continue to Tibet our trip, and they gave us only 2 weeks to stay in China before we had to leave. Now that times, of course, are over. That time was still a little bit close to the Mao Zedong era, and now there are very close friendship with the Chinese colleagues, and they can arrange all the papers if necessary. But it's just typical what kind of problems we were facing, and we really were facing of the sad fact that maybe they will confiscate all our collection. Fortunately, that did not happen. So here we have a collection which we made 5 years later, in 2000, when we were able finally to get to Kangding. We climbed the mountains and we collected Abies fabri, and here is a sample with the beautiful cone axis and the cone, which is bind in a wire so that it would not fall apart after it dry. But there were many interesting stories. If I think back, for instance, in Mexico, we had circumstances where our team went to one direction, other team went to another direction, and one team get lost in the jungle, and basically we spent the whole night that we had no idea what happened with the other half of the team. The early morning, all night we went out to the region, and the night we went out to that region and were shouting, and just the streams and the waterfalls echoed back, and no any human voice. So I remember that was a very dramatic night, because we lost 5 volunteers from our team, and we didn't know whether it was an accident or not. So if I think about these difficult circumstances, I think the botanists really know what a herbarium sheet